My girlfriend cheated on me with my best friend, then fate punished them. I had always believed that loyalty was the foundation of true friendship. I guess that's why it hurt so much when my closest friend, Ellis, betrayed me. That evening, I had just stepped into my favorite country tavern, the Rusty Saddle. It was a small, familiar place on the outskirts of town, filled with wood-paneled walls and the scent of fried catfish and burgers. I found a small table tucked away in the back, ordered a chicken sandwich, some fries, and a cold beer, then turned my attention to the television above the bar. It was playing a documentary on the roots of country music, the kind of slow, sentimental program you'd catch on PBS. They were talking about the legends Hank Williams, Patsy Cline, Merle Haggard, and the hardships they had all endured. I never realized just how many of those country stars had clawed their way out of desperate poverty. It gave the music an even deeper sadness I hadn't fully understood before. As I was dipping a fry into some ketchup, I caught a glimpse of Ellis walking into the tavern. He wasn't alone. Right behind him, laughing a little too brightly, was Marlene, the woman I had been seeing for 6 months. My stomach twisted in a way I can't quite describe. See, I had asked Marlene to come out with me that night. She had declined, claiming she had promised to meet up with some old friends and couldn't reschedule. Yet here she was, her hand casually brushing Ellis's arm as they made their way to a booth on the far side. They didn't notice me, not at first. Marlene and I weren't just casually dating. We were growing serious. We spent most weekends together, took road trips to the coast, went to church on Sundays. We'd even talked lightly but seriously about getting engaged by the end of the year. I had thought she was different. I was falling hard, and she had told me more than once that she felt the same. The documentary on the TV switched to a performance of Crazy by Patsy Cline. I listened, numb, as the lyrics drifted through the room. I'm crazy for trying, and crazy for crying, and I'm crazy for loving you. It hit me like a brick. Was Ellis the somebody new she was leaving me for? Ellis had known exactly how I felt about Marlene. We'd been best friends for years, since freshman year of college, when we both played on the same Division II football team. We had an unspoken code: you don't go after your friend's girl. Ever. Apparently, Ellis had decided that rule no longer applied. I sat for a few more minutes, watching them laugh and lean closer together, pretending they weren't betraying someone just a few tables away. Finally, I'd had enough. I got up, walked across the tavern floor, and stopped at the edge of their table. Ellis saw me first. His expression twisted into something between guilt and annoyance. Tommy, he started. Don't, I said, my voice low. If I ever see you near me again, one of us won't be walking away without needing a hospital bed. I turned to Marlene. And you? I'm done. Hope he was worth it. Before either could respond, I turned and walked out into the cool night air. The next day, my phone started ringing nonstop. Marlene. Ellis. Back and forth. I let every call go to voicemail. I had nothing left to say to either of them. Finally, out of sheer frustration, I answered when Ellis called again. I'm sorry, man, he blurted before I could even speak. It wasn't planned. It just happened. We were talking after work, and one thing led to another. You knew how I felt about her, I said, coldly. How many times? There was a long pause. 3, he said eventually. 3 times. You're trash, Ellis, I said. And Marlene's no better. You two deserve each other. And what about Ruth? I added, biting back my anger. Ruth was Ellis's long-term girlfriend, kind-hearted, a bit shy, and completely unaware that she was dating someone with the loyalty of a rattlesnake. I haven't told her, Ellis muttered. You'd better, I said. Because if you don't, I might. And with that, I hung up. Later that evening, Marlene called again. Against my better judgment, I answered. She tried to downplay everything. Claimed Ellis had pursued her, claimed she hadn't meant to hurt me. I cut her off quickly. I don't care who pursued who. You still chose to betray me, I said. Good luck with whatever it is you think you're chasing. I'm done. I grew up in a small town in Kentucky, the oldest of 8 kids. Football had been my ticket out, a scholarship to a decent college in Ohio, where I studied mechanical engineering and played offensive line. I wasn't anything special, 6 feet 3 inches, 260 pounds, strong but quiet. College gave me my first real taste of freedom. It also introduced me to Ellis, who seemed to have a knack for charming everyone he met. After graduation, I stayed in Ohio, landing a steady job at a Ford manufacturing plant. I rented a modest 1-bedroom apartment and sent money home each month to help out my parents. They'd worked themselves to the bone raising 8 kids, and I wanted to do my part. Ellis worked nearby too, managing a parts warehouse that supplied to my plant. It seemed natural to stay close friends. We hung out most weekends, hit local bars, played pool, and slowly built new lives. Ellis soon started dating Ruth, a girl from the supply chain office. Kind-hearted, bookish, and loyal, Ruth could have done better, but she seemed happy. Meanwhile, I mostly stayed single, too cautious after a few rough breakups. One Christmas, Ellis invited me to his company party. That's where I met Marlene, fiery, beautiful, flirty Marlene. She worked as an executive assistant for one of the warehouse VPs. We clicked instantly. After that night, we started dating seriously, with Ellis and Ruth occasionally double dating with us. Now, looking back, I wonder if it had all been a lie from the beginning. 2 weeks slipped by. In that time, the anger I felt slowly settled into something quieter but heavier, a deep sense of disappointment. One evening, while picking up groceries at the local market, I nearly crashed my cart when I spotted Ruth, or rather, Laurel, as she's called in this retelling. Laurel looked different somehow, more guarded, her usual gentle smile now tinged with sadness. "Hey, Tommy," she said, offering a small wave. "Hey, Laurel," I replied. "How have you been holding up?" We talked for a few minutes, catching up. I could tell she knew something had happened between Ellis and me, and maybe she knew more than she let on. "Honestly," she said, her voice quiet. "It's been a rough couple of weeks. I ended things with Ellis. It wasn't just, you know. There were a lot of things I didn't want to admit to myself. I'm sorry you had to go through that," I said. "And I meant it." She shrugged. Maybe it was a blessing in disguise. There was a short silence between us, not awkward but reflective. "Would you like to grab a coffee sometime?" I asked, surprising myself. A small, real smile broke across her face. "I'd like that," she said. We met at a small coffeehouse the following Saturday. The place smelled like cinnamon and fresh bread, and soft acoustic music played in the background. Talking with Laurel was easy. Without the weight of Ellis and Marlene hovering over us, we discovered a surprising amount in common: love for old country music, memories of growing up in small towns, a shared fondness for fixing things by hand rather than buying new. We didn't talk much about the betrayals. It was like we silently agreed that part was behind us. Instead, we spoke about the future. Laurel mentioned wanting to eventually move into project management at her next company. I shared my goals of becoming a senior engineer within the next couple of years. When I dropped her off at her apartment, she hesitated for a moment before saying, "I'm glad you asked me out today, Tommy. I really needed this." "So did I admitted. We didn't kiss that night, not yet, but there was an understanding growing between us. Something built slower. Stronger. The weeks rolled on, and Laurel and I grew closer. We started meeting after work for dinners or walks in the local park. Nothing extravagant, just real, steady moments that built trust again, brick by brick. Laurel still lived with her roommate, Janine, an older woman who treated her like a little sister. Meanwhile, I was still tucked into my small apartment close to the Ford plant. One afternoon, after a picnic in the park, Laurel brought up something that caught me off guard. "You know," she said, tracing a line in the dirt with a stick, "I actually met you once before we officially met." I frowned. "Really?" She smiled softly. "You wouldn't remember. It was years ago, at a high school football game. I was a sophomore, you were a senior. After the game, a couple of guys cornered me under the bleachers. They were messing around, being jerks. Before I could really panic, you showed up, shoved them off me, and told them if they touched me again, they'd regret it." I stared at her, stunned. "I never knew who you were until much later. I only remembered the number on your jersey, 77. That story hit me harder than I expected. I remembered that moment vaguely, a flash of temper and a desire to protect. I just hadn't realized who I had protected. "Guess fate had plans for us even back then," I said quietly. Laurel's eyes glistened. "I guess it did." As spring turned to early summer, I felt lighter for the first time in months. Laurel was the kind of woman who made you want to be a better man. She listened carefully, laughed easily, and never once made me feel like I had to be someone I wasn't. One evening, after a home-cooked meal at her apartment, Laurel made a killer roast chicken. She finally asked the question that had been lingering between us. "Tommy, do you think we could ever have something real?" I didn't even have to think about it. I already believe we do. And that's when I kissed her, a kiss that wasn't rushed, wasn't desperate, but full of hope for something lasting. Not long after, we were officially a couple. We took things slow, mindful of the wreckage both of us had been through, but we were building something solid, something that felt as steady as a well-made house. Laurel was still working at the warehouse for now, but she was hunting for new opportunities. I was putting in overtime at Ford, saving every extra penny. We even started talking about a trip together, nothing fancy, maybe a weekend in the Smoky Mountains. Just the two of us. No ghosts from the past tagging along. For the first time in a long time, I believed that good things could come after heartbreak. You just had to be patient enough and brave enough to find them. Summer came with new opportunities. I had been invited to a formal dinner party hosted by one of the senior managers at Ford, a celebration of his 25th wedding anniversary. It was a pretty big deal in our small circle, and it would be hosted at the nicest hotel in the city, the Crestmont. I asked Laurel if she would be willing to attend with me. "I understand if you're not comfortable," I said. She smiled warmly. "I would be honored, Tommy." Given the distance and the late hour the event was expected to end, I made arrangements for a room at the hotel for the night. I told Laurel up front I didn't want any misunderstandings. She simply squeezed my hand and said, "Tommy, I trust you." We arrived at the Crestmont in the late afternoon, bringing our clothes along to change into before the event. I borrowed a tuxedo from a friend. Laurel wore a flowing sapphire blue dress that turned heads as soon as she stepped into the lobby. I must have stared a bit too long because she gave me a teasing grin. "Careful, cowboy. We haven't even made it to the ballroom yet." At the dinner, I introduced Laurel to everyone I knew, coworkers, plant managers, even a couple of Ford's regional directors. Everyone seemed genuinely charmed by her down-to-earth nature and easy grace. Throughout the evening, Laurel also reconnected with some familiar faces, women she had worked with when she was still in supply management. Small conversations turned to bigger ones, and before the night was through, she found herself deep in conversation with the head of human resources, Mrs. Whitman. Later, over a glass of wine, Laurel told me the news. "She wants me to come in for an interview next week," she said, eyes shining. "They have an opening for a supply coordinator position at Ford, full-time, great benefits." "That's amazing, Laurel," I said, meaning every word. "You deserve something better." "Maybe this was meant to happen all along," she said. The party stretched into the night. The food was excellent: prime rib, shrimp, roasted vegetables, but it wasn't the meal that I would remember most. It was the way Laurel fit next to me so easily, like the missing piece of a puzzle I hadn't even realized was incomplete. After we danced to a few slow songs, the exhaustion of the day caught up with us. We said goodnight to the hosts and made our way upstairs. In the room, the mood shifted, quieter, more intimate. Laurel stepped out of her heels and let down her hair. I simply stood there for a moment, soaking her in. "You're staring," she said softly. "I'm grateful," I replied. She crossed the room, took my hand, and said, "No regrets?" "None," I said. The night we spent together wasn't about passion or impulse, it was about trust, about sealing the bond that had been growing steadily between us. We fell asleep wrapped around each other, the city lights blinking outside the window. Just before I drifted off, I heard her whisper, "I love you, Tommy." And in the stillness, I whispered it back. In the morning, Laurel had already brewed the complimentary coffee in the room when I woke up. We laughed about how stiff our legs were from dancing and got ready to head home. On our way out of the hotel, we ran into Mrs. Whitman again, who gave Laurel a friendly wave and reminded her of her appointment on Monday. Things felt different now, lighter, hopeful. That Monday, Laurel went in for her interview. By Wednesday, she got the call, she was offered the job. We celebrated with a quiet dinner at our favorite small diner, the Maple Fork. As we sat across from each other, she reached over and took my hand. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" I asked. "For believing in me when I didn't even believe in myself." "You're worth believing in," I said simply. With her new position secured, Laurel gave her notice at the warehouse. Most of her co-workers were supportive, though there were a few sideways glances from people who had been closer to Ellis. Still, Laurel held her head high. She had earned her fresh start. Meanwhile, at Ford, I couldn't help noticing how many of my co-workers had started treating us like a known couple. There were winks, teasing remarks, and friendly congratulations. Neither Laurel nor I minded. After everything we had been through, it was nice to be seen, really seen, as something solid and lasting. One afternoon, about 2 months after Laurel had started her new job, I asked her out on a Saturday drive to the countryside. We ended up at a quiet overlook, where you could see the rolling fields stretching for miles. As she leaned against the hood of my truck, I took a deep breath. "Laurel," I said, "I know we haven't been together for years. But sometimes you just know. And I know I want to spend the rest of my life with you." Her eyes widened. I pulled out a simple, classic engagement ring, nothing flashy, but full of meaning. And right there, with the wind tugging at her hair and the fields golden behind her, I asked, "Will you marry me?" Laurel covered her mouth with her hands, tears shining in her eyes. Yes, she said, her voice trembling. Yes, Tommy, 100 times yes. We hugged, we laughed, we cried, and in that moment, I knew. No matter what pain or betrayal had come before, the future was ours to shape now. And this time, we were building something that nobody could break. After our engagement, the next few weeks were a whirlwind. I called my parents in Kentucky to tell them the news. My mother cried happy tears over the phone, and my father simply said, "It's about time, son." They immediately invited Laurel and me down for a weekend visit to celebrate properly. Laurel's family was equally thrilled. Her father, Mr. Turner, insisted that we have the wedding in their hometown so that all the relatives could attend. He even offered, quite insistently, to cover most of the wedding costs. Laurel protested at first, but I could tell she was touched. Her family wanted the very best for her. And truth be told, so did I. We set a date 4 months out, just enough time to pull everything together without dragging it out. Laurel's mother, Susan, dove into the planning with energy that could have powered a small town. She found a charming country church for the ceremony and a spacious hall nearby for the reception. Meanwhile, my own mother worked on gathering names for the invitations and sewing some special decorations by hand. Joan, Laurel's former roommate, helped her pick out a wedding dress, a simple but beautiful ivory gown that made Laurel look like she'd stepped right out of a dream. My brothers and sisters, aunts, uncles, cousins, everyone was planning to make the trip down for the big day. It felt like life itself was throwing open a door and telling us, "Come on in. It's your time now." As we were planning, something unexpected happened. The plant manager at Ford, Mr. Carter, called me into his office one afternoon. "Tommy," he said, leaning back in his chair, "I heard through the grapevine you're getting married." "Yes, sir," I said, grinning. "Well, we can't have you rushing off the morning after your wedding just to clock in. I've cleared it with HR. You and Laurel are getting a week off, fully paid. Consider it a gift from us." He wasn't done yet. He handed me an envelope. Inside were 2 cruise tickets, a 4-day trip down the Gulf. "Congratulations, son," he said warmly. "Now go make some memories." I could hardly wait to tell Laurel. I picked her up from work, drove her to a quiet spot overlooking the river, and handed her the tickets. Her reaction was everything I hoped for: wide-eyed amazement, followed by laughter and happy tears. "We don't have to rush now," she said, hugging me tightly. "We can actually enjoy everything." And we meant it. Every detail of the wedding felt like a celebration, not a chore. The big day arrived on a warm autumn afternoon. The church was packed, nearly every pew filled with family, friends, and even a few co-workers who had made the long drive. As I waited at the front of the church, my heart hammered against my ribs. The organist began the wedding march. I turned to see Laurel, walking slowly down the aisle on her father's arm. She was radiant, her smile steady and sure. I felt the air leave my lungs. I had never seen anyone more beautiful. When her father gave her hand to mine, I could feel the love and pride in his grip. We exchanged vows we had written ourselves, simple promises spoken from the heart. When the minister said, "You may kiss the bride," I lifted Laurel's veil, kissed her gently, and the entire room erupted in cheers and applause. It took nearly half an hour to exit the church because everyone wanted hugs and photos. I didn't mind, I was too happy to care about the delays. The reception at the hall was everything we dreamed it would be. Good food, good music, and all the people who mattered most in one place. Laurel and I had our first dance to an old George Strait ballad. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Later, guests clinked their glasses with forks, prompting us to kiss again and again. Everyone laughed and danced. Kids ran around the floor, older folks shared stories at the tables. It was perfect, a little chaotic, a little messy, but perfect. Late that night, as we said goodbye to the last of the guests, I pulled Laurel close and whispered, "I don't think I've ever been this happy." "Get used to it," she teased, her arms wrapping around me. The cruise was everything we needed: 4 days of sun, laughter, and just being together without worrying about schedules or expectations. We returned home sun-kissed and ready to start building the next chapter of our life. We settled into our routine easily. Laurel thrived at her new job at Ford, quickly making friends and earning the respect of her co-workers. We bought a modest 3-bedroom home with a big backyard and a small hot tub Laurel fell in love with immediately. Every night after work, we shared dinners, sometimes home-cooked, sometimes just pizza on the couch, and talked about our day. No drama, no games, just real, honest partnership. We didn't just love each other, we genuinely liked each other too. A few months into our marriage, Laurel received a call from an old friend who still worked at the warehouse. Apparently, there had been news about Ellis and Marlene. It turned out Ellis had gone ahead and married Marlene, but life wasn't turning out the way they'd planned. Ellis was deep in debt, relying heavily on credit cards to maintain the life he thought he deserved. To make matters worse, the friend revealed that a DNA test had been done after Marlene gave birth. The child wasn't Ellis's. Laurel and I stared at each other, stunned. Neither of us said anything for a long moment. Finally, Laurel shook her head and said softly, "Some things fall apart for a reason." "I guess we were the lucky ones," I replied. And we were. Because while betrayal had closed one door, it had opened another, leading both of us to a life more real, more joyful, and more meaningful than we ever could have imagined. Thank you for watching the video. Like it if you watched the video to the end, and don't forget to subscribe. Have a nice day.